Ever feel like there's got to be more to reality than like what we see every day?
It's like you can sense it, you know?
Yeah, like there's this whole other layer or level to things just hidden beneath the surface.
Right. And so much of what we're going to dig into today with Castaneda and Don Juan, it's like they're pulling back that curtain a little.
Exactly. So we're taking another deep dive into Carlos Castaneda's experiences, this time cracking open tales of power.
Which, I gotta say, this book, it's like stepping into another dimension.
Seriously.
The way Castaneda describes his apprenticeship with Don Juan, this Yaqui sorcerer, it's just mind-blowing.
Totally. And one of the wildest things, I think, is how Don Juan tries to explain his worldview.
And it's an explanation, not a simple one, more like a total, like it just shakes up how we usually see the world.
Oh, yeah. Right from the get-go, Castaneda is thrown into these experiences that make him question, like, everything.
Everything he thought he knew about reality, perception, everything.
Totally. Like that first encounter he has with what Don Juan calls knowledge.
Oh, man. Okay, so picture this. You're out in the desert, middle of the night, and you've been told you have an appointment with knowledge.
Okay, that alone would freak me out a little bit.
Right. But then it gets weirder. Castaneda starts seeing things. A man hiding in the bushes, then this massive bird.
And Don Juan, being Don Juan, just totally cryptic. He's like, no, that was knowledge passing by. Knowledge is a moth.
A moth?
Like, who thinks of knowledge as a moth?
Right. It's brilliant, though, when you think about it. It throws you off balance.
Totally.
A moth, in this context, it's not just some random bug. It represents something way deeper, something that for Castaneda at that moment is like alluring but also terrifying.
He even describes this moth of knowledge as almost sinister. Like it makes him feel super uneasy. Why such a strong reaction?
Because real knowledge, the kind Don Juan is talking about, it's not about racking up facts.
Right.
It's about facing up to the limits of how you see the world, your whole framework of reality. And that can be scary.
Which is where this whole idea of personal power comes in, right?
Yeah.
Don Juan is always pushing Castaneda to accumulate more of this power.
Yeah, and this isn't about controlling other people.
Right.
It's about the power to shift your own perception, to break free of what we all just accept as normal, and to like catch a glimpse of something way, way bigger.
So how do you do that? What's the path to shifting your perception like that?
Well, Don Juan, he's very specific about this. Silencing the internal dialogue is key.
Okay, so two things. One, how do you actually silence your internal dialogue?
It's not easy, that's for sure.
And two, what's the point? What does that even achieve?
Okay, think about it. How often are you really, truly present in the moment, experiencing the world directly without that constant chatter going on in your head?
Oh, man. Like all the time, right?
Right. And that chatter, according to Don Juan, that's a filter. It's distorting how we experience reality. Silencing that dialogue, it's like cleaning the lens, so to speak. It lets you have a more direct experience of the world.
It's like the difference between, I don't know, just glancing at a sunset and really seeing it, being totally present in that moment.
Exactly. And this is where Castaneda's encounters with Don Gennaro come in. This guy, he's like a walking, talking example of defying the laws of physics.
Oh, yeah. He does things that just shouldn't be possible.
Right. And it's not like Don Juan's just dismissing these as, oh, that's just a magic trick, or he's hallucinating.
Right.
He presents these things as proof that there's a different order of reality, something beyond our normal understanding of time and space, even the self.
Yeah, like Castaneda talks about seeing Don Gennaro in multiple places at the same time.
Oh.
Disappearing and reappearing. It's like he's bending reality or something.
Exactly. And this difference, this other order of reality, Don Juan calls this the difference between the tonal and the nagual.
Okay, so what exactly are the tonal and the nagual? Because those terms seem really important for getting what Don Juan's talking about.
Yeah, they're central to his whole worldview. So the tonal, in a nutshell, is basically our everyday awareness. Okay.
The world we experience through language, reason, logic.
Right, that makes sense.
It's how we make sense of things, organize our experience, but it also limits us.
Okay.
The nagual, on the other hand, that's the realm of ultimate reality, and you can only really tap into it through heightened perception.
Yeah.
And that takes practice.
So it's like the tonal is the map, but the nagual is the actual territory.
Right. That's a great analogy.
Right.
And a sorcerer, as Don Juan describes it, learns to navigate between these two.
Oh, wow.
They use the tonal to kind of make sense of the nagual.
Right.
But never mistaking the map for the territory itself.
Which reminds me of those moments when Castaneda talks about seeing the world with this totally fresh perspective, like a child almost, like he's really seeing things for the first time.
Exactly. Those are glimpses into the Nagual, moments where the filters of his tonal mind, they drop away just for a second, and he experiences reality in its most raw form.
And it's like he can barely even describe those moments. Oh, totally. He says he feels sucked out, like words just fail him.
Yeah, like language itself can't quite capture what he's experiencing.
Right. And Don Juan, he's always saying how language is part of the tonal, inherently limited in describing the narwhal.
So how do you even begin to, I don't know, integrate these two sides of reality?
It's tricky, right? Because you're not trying to just ditch the tonal completely.
Right.
It's more about, I think, expanding your idea of what's real
Okay.
to include a much wider range of experiences.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the concept of the double comes in.
Oh, yeah, the double. That's a whole other level of weirdness in Castaneda's story. Like, he describes Don Gennaro being in multiple places at once.
Right. It's like he transcends the limits of his physical body.
Yeah, and Don Juan links this whole double thing to dreaming.
Exactly.
But he doesn't mean like when we're asleep, right?
No, it's more about a different state of awareness, one that sorcerers cultivate through, disciplined practice, especially by silencing that internal dialogue.
Right.
Don Juan suggests that by quieting the mind, sorcerers can actually dream their double into being.
Wait, hold on. So it's not just seeing things differently. It's about like actually manifesting a second self in the world.
It's more nuanced than that.
Mhm.
Remember, the lines between self and other, they get blurry in the realm of the Nagual. Don Juan even says at one point, the double is the self, and the self dreams the double.
Whoa.
It's about recognizing how fluid our identity really is, how our sense of self isn't as fixed as we often think.
So the sorcerer is both the dreamer and the dreamed.
Exactly. And it's like Don Juan wants Castaneda and us to just experience this shift in perception rather than trying to over-intellectualize it.
He's giving him these crazy experiences, these glimpses into the Nagual, and then he's like, all right, now figure it out.
Yeah, like feel your way through the darkness.
And sometimes that darkness is really literal. There's that one scene, I think it's in Tales of Power, where Castaneda's with Don Juan and Don Gennaro.
Yeah.
And Don Gennaro tells him to take off all his clothes and go out into the night. Yeah, to grab the ally.
Talk about a terrifying and exhilarating instruction.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can tell Castaneda is completely freaked out. He'd had this really scary experience in the dark a while back, so this just triggers all that past trauma.
Yeah, he's terrified, but he still goes out there.
And he runs into something he can't even explain, like a force or a presence moving super fast. He can't quite see it, but the experience is both terrifying and exhilarating, just like you said.
It's like a physical manifestation of the unknown.
Totally. And then Don Juan mentions that it wasn't even Don Gennaro who sent him out there. It was his double.
Oh, man, talk about messing with his head. It's like even Castaneda's perception of who's physically present is fluid at that point.
Totally. Shifting between the tonal and the Nagual.
Exactly. And it just highlights how the more Castaneda experiences, the less certain he becomes of anything. His whole understanding of reality is crumbling, and he's left trying to make sense of a world that's way more mysterious and fluid than he ever imagined.
It's like the more he learns, the less he actually feels like he knows.
It's true. It's like he's being initiated into this totally new way of experiencing the world.
Yeah, and all his old categories, all his old ways of understanding, they just don't apply anymore.
Precisely. A Castaneda has to confront those limitations of the tonal.
That rational, logical part of us that likes to categorize and label everything.
Exactly. He has to open himself up to the fluidity of the Nagual, even if it's scary or doesn't make sense.
Which brings us to that image of the wings of perception.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's this whole wider reality accessible to us.
Always there.
If we could just get out of our own way and really see.
Right. Like we all have those moments where you get so absorbed in something, so present that you kind of lose yourself in it.
Yeah, totally.
Imagine that, but amplified, expanded to this much larger reality. That's the potential Don Juan's pointing to.
I think I'm starting to get what Don Juan's saying, at least a little bit. But if words can't really capture these experiences, how do we make sense of it all?
It's a paradox, right? Even Don Juan says that the tonal mind can't fully grasp the Nagual.
So where does that leave us?
Well, we still have to use the tools we have, right?
So we're left with this kind of dance between logic and intuition, trying to make sense of these experiences that seem to contradict each other.
Exactly. And Don Juan's not saying abandon reason, throw logic out the window. He's saying expand your definition of what's rational, what's possible.
Okay, I like that.
Acknowledge that our intellectual understanding is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
And sometimes facing that mystery, like Castaneda does, it can be scary. He even talks about feeling like he's coming apart, being pulled in different directions.
Right, like the ground beneath his feet is dissolving, and those moments, they're crucial because they force him to confront the possibility that his sense of self, the way he sees reality, it's much more fluid than he ever thought.
So it's like the more he learns, the less certain he becomes. But at the same time, he becomes more willing to keep exploring.
That's the mark of a true learner, isn't it? To stay open and curious, even when faced with the unknown.
Yeah, to embrace the mystery instead of trying to control it.
Exactly.
Castaneda's journey with Don Juan, it's not just about learning new things, it's about unlearning old ways of seeing the world, too.
Yes. To make room for something new, something much bigger.
A world where, knowledge might show up as a moth and where the way we see things actually shapes the reality we experience.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. So to everyone listening, here's something to think about. What if the world isn't what it seems? What if the limits of our perception aren't the limits of reality itself? As you go about your day, keep those questions alive, because you never know what incredible things you might discover when you allow yourself to see with new eyes.